Good morning and welcome to the Dalles Chamber of Community Affairs. Today our guest is Lisa Gambee with the Wasco County Clerk's office. She is our rock star when it comes to the elections and more. But before we do that, we'll go around the room. Everybody introduce who you are, your organization. I'm sure Lisa knows most of you, but it always is a good reminder who you're representing. And if you promise to keep it short, you can do a little soundbite about what's happening with your organization or an event coming up. So I'm going to start with Mr. Scott McKay.
Oh, good morning, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. Scott McKay, Community Liaison for Circles of Care. Circles of Care is a nonprofit that connects older adults with volunteers. And right now, I think I have about 4 that have just signed up for older adults in the last week who are looking for some kind of assistance, periodic assistance, friendly visits. A couple of people need, some light housekeeping. And so we're always looking for volunteers. I know all of you are extremely busy, but if you know of anyone that you want to get out of your hair or you want to get them doing something else, just have them go to the Mid-Columbia Senior Center website. And at the top, you can click on Circles of Care, and there you can sign up and apply to be a volunteer. So it's a great opportunity. Many times you make a real friend by visiting someone maybe once a week, just to chat for about an hour, half hour. So that's all I have, Lisa.
So the link for the volunteers is actually on the Mid-Columbia Senior Center website.
Yeah, and it's also, you can also go to Age Plus Circles of Care. But I try to direct people to the Senior Center website because there's a lot of fantastic information there that Rob has up. And so just trying to promote the center.
Perfect. Thank you. Corliss.
Good morning. I know Lisa, but hi to everyone else. And I represent Habitat for Humanity and the library, the Senior Center, and the latest one is the the college, Columbia Gorge Community College, the foundation. So I'm helping to raise scholarship money.
All right, Dan Spotts.
Thank you, Corliss, for doing that. Dan Spotts, Columbia Gorge Community College, for another 2 weeks. In mid-July, I will be starting with City of the Dalles as Economic Development Officer and looking forward to working with all of you in that capacity. A couple of things with the college coming up. One, we have the Ford Family Foundation in town taking a picture with several of us involved in the Child Care Center project. The photo will be at Chenoweth Middle School. The connection is with Yoncalla Early Works. Superintendent Pat Sublett with Columbia Gorge ESD and her husband were instrumental in developing that. Look up on online, or I'll put a link in the chat box, Yoncalla Early Works. And so Ford Family Foundation has been following our efforts to establish a public child care center in the Dalles and wants to help publicize that, and also for the purposes of future fundraising. There's, of course, quite a ways to go in terms of renovating Chenoweth Middle School and turning it into a public child care center, but we've got a good start on it. Second, over at the airport, several of us are going to be, not me, I'm going to miss it, but several of our team from the college will be visiting Hood Tech, which has established 3 very large, beautiful hangars at Columbia Gorge Regional Airport, one of which they wish to make available as an interim space for our aviation maintenance technician training program until we can build a permanent hangar over there. And that process is still in the works. Thanks to Klickitat County and City of the Dalles, we have an EDA grant to build a hangar and expand employment capacity at the airport, but we've still got a fundraising gap to go on that one also. So anyhow, lots of stuff going on. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Phil Brady.
Good morning, Phil Brady, Wasco County Commissioner. And 2 things. One, we tabled the discussion yesterday regarding appointing a new Gorge Commissioner. I'm putting together a new process to run that. It'll take a month. And so we're still open, looking for applicants, good applicant to be Gorge Commissioner. So if they would send it my way. And Lisa Farquharson, a big come back to you for, I was riding my bike on Highway 30 toward Rowena Crest. And Scott, speaking of senior citizens needing some help, I got passed by a man and his wife. He is 76 years old. He was riding on a regular bicycle. His wife keeps up to him on an electric bicycle. But I bring this back to you, Lisa, because they were raving about the wonderful advice and wonderful conversation they had at the Chamber of Commerce. Your staff really gave them, they appreciated the directions you gave them.
They were a fun couple and they were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary.
Yeah.
And they were looking for at least a 30-mile ride.
Well,
And I'm sitting here going, I'm Jeeping it. You can ride it all you want.
Cool.
I redirected them a little bit. They were going to end up trying to climb over 7 Mile Hill. So no, just drop down into Mosier, go to the coffee shop and then come on back. Yeah.
So they had a route that was 34 miles and but he was telling me what he's done. He's done a 300 run in California. And I'm like, okay. Anyway,
Yeah.
They were a fun couple. I'm glad you ran into them. So sorry they passed you.
I caught up with him again. We rode together.
Okay, there you go. All right, Philip Mosher.
Good morning, Philip Mosher, Sotheby's Realty, the Dalles Arts Center, and the Planning Commission. Couple updates on the Arts Center. We have the really awesome Small Works exhibit going on right now, curated by Lou Palermo. That goes until July 1st. Very well worth taking a look at. Significant part of the artists are local artists who've just done a fabulous job on a small limited space. So there's 26 pieces there, very well worth taking a look at. I also wanted to give an early kind of mark your calendars. We are putting together a really fantastic event on Saturday, September 16th. We're calling it the Denim and Diamonds Dance Party, and it will be held at the Pines Estate out on Mill Creek Road. There's going to be a line dance instructor there, and it's a fundraiser for the Art Center. I think it's going to be a really, really fun event. We're just kind of sneaking it out right now. We're doing a larger marketing push for it within the next couple of weeks. And then the last thing I have is this Saturday's Mosier Fest over in Mosier in the afternoon. Lots of vendors and entertainment, and I think it's going to be a really great thing. So if anybody wants to check out that in Mosier, I'd highly recommend it. I'll definitely go check it out myself. Thanks. That's it for me.
Thank you. And Sue Davis.
Okay, good morning. Good to see you all. I'm the Foundation Executive Director for the Columbia Gorge Community College, and I'll make a few quick reports about the college and about the foundation. The first thing I'll say about the foundation is that we are working steadily toward our September 9th Founders Cup golf tournament. And that thanks to our call last week, I have had some contact with the city of the Dalles and Wasco County, and they both seem somewhat interested in joining us to play golf. So thank you all for those recommendations and ways to reach those folks. That's taking a lot of the energy and work of the foundation right now, since that is one of our primary fundraisers, and it is our focus for the foundation is fundraising for scholarships. And we're also doing a lot of grant writing and other work in the community. So I was recently at the Dalles Farmers Market on June 10th with a team of our board members and our student representative to our board. So that was a nice opportunity to get out and say hello to people and share information about the college and the foundation. The other thing that I will say is news for the college is that we have hired a new president, and that individual is Ken Lawson. He comes from the Skagit Valley College, and he's joining us starting August 1st. So we're really excited about that. We had a really robust search and sifting and interviewing and extensive process amongst the 33 candidates. So we're really pleased with our selection, and that he will be joining us starting in August. And yeah, those are my updates for today.
Thank you, Sue. With that, I just want to say, don't forget the 4th of July weekend, or the celebration that's coming up. We have the parade application on our website. We would like more. We have 8. We would need more. So spread the word. We need to have a celebration in our community. And we always know it waits until the last week, but we'd like, not for it to wait until the last minute. So the 27th is the deadline, and it is free for anybody to sign up. And this is our chance to celebrate. We have gotten the approval that we will have a flyover. We're waiting for the final details, and we'll put out a press release, but we will have some mighty jets buzzing the community just as the parade is ready to start. So we are hoping that will help a little bit in just reminding what we are celebrating. So with that, Lisa, go ahead and take it away. I know if none of you have had Lisa on the screen with you, she's open to questions in the middle and all of that. And then if for some reason someone gets shy and put it in the chat, I'll make sure that you get that question.
Thanks. Well, I do know everybody here except for Sue. I don't think I've met you yet, Sue. So nice to meet you. I'm sure that's all kinds of fun doing fundraising, right? Please give me money, right? So
that's why it's called fundraising.
Right. You can leave off the D. So I am Lisa Gambee. I'm your Wasco County Clerk. Our office, if you don't know, we handle elections. That's one of our major responsibilities. Our other major responsibilities are issuing marriage licenses. We can also marry people, but I don't, because I am that person that cries at weddings. And it is really kind of not what people want. Is their officiant up there crying while they're trying to get married? So I don't do it anymore. And then we also do land recordings. So anything where you are conveying fee title, mortgages, all of the deeds, we have that we do daily in our office. And if you ever want to look up records for anything in Wasco County, our website has got an online service called Digital Research Room. And you can look up any public record that's been filed with our office through that portal. So it's actually a great way. There's some really great resources on our website. We have our GIS map, which allows you to look at any parcel, find out ownership. That links you to the assessor's office if you want to look up the tax base. And then we've got the digital research room. And then we also have our surveyors documents online. So the county makes a lot of information available online. And then the final thing that we handle is what's been called to date the Board of Property Tax Appeals, which is a service that is conducted by our office, that if people feel like their property value has been appraised too high, you can appeal that appraisal through the clerk's office. And we have hearings, and it's a board of three board people there from the community. Because of the name tax being in it, it was always confusing to people because they thought they were able to protest their taxes. It's not, it's about your property values. And so the legislation, one of the few things that got passed was a change of the name to Property Values Appeal Board. So that'll be one of the pleasant changes from legislation this year. So as Lisa mentioned, especially with a small group, I have found that it is often easiest to have you pose a question to me that you're like, oh, I have this burning desire to know about XYZ. And you want to get the actual information, the real information directly from the source. So that is always, do not hesitate to ask me any questions, and we'll kind of move into that in a little bit. I thought I'd start off a little bit by talking about the most recent election. So special district election, which is the most misunderstood of all of the elections that we have. I did a speech at Lions Club. I think it was Lions or one of them. And I told people, I was like, okay, so how many people know the 4 dates or at least months in any given year where an election can be held? And most people didn't realize it was limited to 4 times a year. It used to be that you could call an election whenever you wanted to put something on a ballot in front of the people. And it's really interesting to me when I go back to our archives and I look through the boxes, there's like, this ballot went out, and then 3 months later, somebody else was doing an election for this other thing. And it was like all over the board. It was like the Wild West. And they finally said, you know what, you can only do an election in May, August, November, and March. And almost nobody does the March. Well, our county rarely has a March or August election because we're just so small, right? And when you put a ballot or anything on the ballot in those elections, you're paying for all of it, right? So for instance, we normally don't have a November election in an odd year because the general election happens in even years and the primary happens in even years. And then May of an odd year is the special district election where we're electing the boards for all of the school district, fire, water, etc. Right? And then November, you normally don't have anything in an odd year. But this year, the school has stated to us that they are planning to put a bond out for school in November. And you know, the tough part of that is that you get sole attention, right, to the subject because typically nobody else is putting anything on the ballot. The downside being you have to pay for that entire election. And I pulled our election day report, which is our billing report just for this last May general election. And it's countywide, so it's a little bit bigger than what the school would have. But that election was $32,490.88. Right. So the cost of elections has gone up. Postage went way up. Cost of paper has gone way up. Right. So every ballot that we have to send out that doesn't come back to us, it's interesting. The number here is the election cost per eligible voter. So that means the cost per voter that's registered that we send a ballot out to is $1.80. The cost of the ballots that were returned to us when we look at what came back for the special district election, which was the lowest turnout we've had since I've been here in 8 years. We had a just under 22% turnout for this May election. That cost per ballot that was cast, $8.01. So you can kind of see that for us, from my office, you know, one of the election myths that we get a lot is, well, you're trying to suppress the vote. And what we often say to people is, look, I don't care how you vote. I care that you vote, right? If I'm going to spend $32,000 of the taxpayer money to have an election and send you a ballot, I would much rather have 100% turnout, that everybody sent their stuff back. We won't ever get there, right? But it'd certainly be nice to have better than 22% turnout. And it's interesting because I think there's just kind of a bit of a fatigue among voters because of the politics and how kind of the politics of elections have come into the mechanics of elections. And that's when people say, you know, you're trying to suppress my vote. I'm like, no, I just want you to vote. And I don't care about the outcome, right? My office is solely focused on getting the right ballot in the hand of the right person of the voter who says that they are where they are, right? And that when it comes back to us, that we can confirm, and we do it by the signature, right? That this is the person that voted the ballot. They're attesting that they voted that ballot, and that's the only ballot that they returned back to us. So just kind of a food for thought in that it is very expensive to run an election. You know, taxpayer money is paying for that. And our whole goal as a community should be to get people involved and engaged in voting. I had a lot of angry ballots this time, where people, you know, we get notes from people all the time. You would be surprised at some of the notes that come back to us. And I'm like, you realize that I'm just the clerk. I can't actually like prevent that person from running for office. So you might think they're a crook, and thank you for telling me that. But, you know, those are the normal ones. This time I had a several ballots where somebody took just a bit, you know, their pen, and they wrote across the entire front of the ballot, "This is a sham. Voting is a sham. There is nobody on this ballot. Who are these people?" And then some really interesting ways to spell how to drop the F-bomb. So very, very interesting. So Dan, I'll start with you because you had your hand up even before I started talking about the angry ballot voters.
Lisa, first off, thank you for doing what you're doing and putting up with all of that. You have my utmost admiration, and it's courageous in these times more than ever before. It is absolutely courageous. Thank you.
Thank
You and your staff. What my question on a single issue election, typically what's the turnout? And do we have any recent historic precedent on a single issue in November? I'm thinking back a long ways on that one.
Right. You know, it really, I was sitting there thinking, we don't ever have November elections. And then Christy and I were looking back through it and we're like, wait a minute, we've had November elections for the past like 4 years now in the odd cycle. So we've had 2 elections a year for sure, even in odd years lately, which is unusual for Wasco County, but it depends on what's being brought up. And so for instance, Shaniko is a perennial special needs. I'll just put it that way politely. They can never seem to keep anybody on council, and then they have to call for you have to have a special election, etc. Schools often tend to do, from what I've seen, one of the recent ones we had was Jefferson County. But because Jefferson County bleeds over, and some of the school districts bleed over into the south part of the county, the reservation in particular, you'll see a measure about that. And I don't think that one was particularly high turnout, but I'm not the filing officer, so I haven't seen for that one. I would imagine that the school district and the fact that it's money, right, seems to get people's interest a lot more. And so I would imagine there'll be fairly high turnout. We only send it to, you know, the school district zone, but that's a good chunk of Wasco County. So we do our best to try to give some estimates to organizations when they say they're going to bring something on the ballot. But it's definitely been much harder given the fluctuation in material prices. So I would imagine that North Wasco County School District 21 bringing a bond to the voters will get a relatively high attention.
Right. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah. Phil.
Likewise, thank you for all you're doing, and on top of that, you manage a staff in terms of keeping track of hours and everything. So it's not just the public facing side of it and the policy. It's also a management job. And I agree with Dan that every elected person right now, our primary job is to promote democracy by making things run in ways that people can understand. Couple questions for you. This first is a hypothetical. How impossible would it be to go back to voting in person? it's a hypothetical. I see how you almost personalize each ballot, given the complexity of the districts as people cross over. Yeah, and I feel embarrassed when I listen to news in other places where people have to stand in line and take time out from work, and then I realize, oh my gosh, I just take it out of the envelope and put it back in the mail.
Right. So yes, it is one of the things that, in fact, Wasco County, I'm still currently under a lawsuit with, not the commissioner that is with us today, but the 3 former commissioners who got sued by a voter. And it's one of a suit that was brought from a group that believes that there's not integrity in elections. And one of the things that they're trying to get as the outcome is that we would have to go back to counting ballots by hand, like by people would do it. And I gotta say that would be the worst idea ever. Because unfortunately, people are the ones that make mistakes, and Corliss can attest to this. So this election, one of the things that I love the most is that in a special district election, often there is not somebody that runs for an office at all. So Columbia Gorge ESD, Zone 3 position, no candidate was filed. When that happens, my office is required to tally the write-in votes. And assuming that we can figure out what the name is that the person wrote, we tally them and we figure out, well, who won? Well, this time we had a 6-way tie of winners who got 2 votes each, right? Because that's what people do. They randomly are like, oh, I think this person would be good and I'll write them in. So when you have a tie, that it prompts an automatic recount. So what that does is it says, you now have to go pull the box where the physical ballot is sitting and have teams of people count those votes and see if it actually matches the tally of the tabulator, the scanner that we ran it through the first time. So Corliss got to be part of that group, right? I always love having Corliss help out, right? Talk about rock star in elections. So we had Corliss and Sandy Smith, because you have to have people of opposing political parties working together. And then we had myself and Chrissy Zog, who's my chief deputy. And you have to pull the ballots out, right? And you have to sort them into ballots that have the particular Zone 3 contest. And then you have to say, here's another, in the next box, you put the ones that actually had a write-in vote. And then the third box is one where it had the contest on it, but nobody voted on it. That's an undervote, right? And when we first started out, the 2 of them, we're all counting, right? Like you're getting done and we have a sheet, a control sheet that tells us, okay, in this particular box of ballots, you should have 2 write-ins and you should have 26 undervotes. And invariably you're counting them and you're like, I'm not coming up with that. Right. And so then you got to kind of trade off and the other person counts it and they're like, oh, no, I come up with the number. Right. And so you can get there because you have this control sheet that already tells you what you should be finding. And oftentimes we'd have to go back to the ballots that we thought didn't have the contest on it. And it did. And you just missed it the first time around and you pull that out. And, so you're kind of having to work things around. Well, can you imagine trying to have 2 people sitting across from each other with a live ballot that has not been tallied. And one of them would have to say, okay, so this is Columbia Gorge ESD Zone 1 chair, and it's a vote for Sherry, right? And then the other person's got to go find the right contest on their tally sheet, and then they've got to mark the tally for that candidate. And you go through the entire ballot, and then they have to flip. And one reads back to the other what the count was, right? Because you got to make sure that somebody didn't mark it in the wrong area. So first of all, it would be prone to human error, which is, we have done our best to take human counting out of things because it just is problematic. And it would take forever. You think it's bad now, it's a month before we have certified results because of postmark ballots, right? And if you were to really have people doing it, I'd be lucky if I got the first tabulation results using people in a month, much less within a few days of public day. So there's definitely a push that people think machines don't count it right. And one of the things that we do is we have a logic and accuracy deck. And that takes one of every ballot style. So this time we had 39 different ballot styles. So the combination of districts and where you live and the rest of that makes very unique ballot styles. So I can tell you that, well, I didn't do Dan's, or Dan, are you back in the Dalles area? Or are you still living over in the Washington on the dark side?
I'm over here in Clickitat County with the crazy sheriff.
Right. So I can tell you Dan's ballot was definitely different than the rest of you, but I would wager that probably everybody on the screen still had a slightly different ballot than each other, right? It's just where you live and the combination of stuff. And so it just is a lot of work to tabulate it, but we have a deck that we create with each one of those ballot styles, and we mark it a very specific way. And we have a spreadsheet that tells us what the expected results are based on how those ballots were marked by us. We run a pre-test of that to make sure that we didn't make the mistake on the spreadsheet side. And then we run that same deck at multiple spots throughout the election cycle to ensure that the tabulation machine is still giving us the exact same results wherever it is in the process. And we do that a final time before we certify. So that's whatever people, you go sue me, that's fine. Because I'm going to stand up in court and say, you know what, Judge, I can guarantee you that those results were 100% accurate because I tested the machine at 4 different times during that process, and each one of those outcomes was exactly as expected. Right. So other than security measures to make sure that somebody can't bring a USB port into my tabulation room and infect it. And we have all of the ports locked down, except for one that I need to use when I pull results and bring them upstairs. There's just, it's ludicrous to me to think that a tabulation machine cannot do the job of humans, because I'm telling you, it does a better job than humans, and in a much more reasonable time frame. So sorry, Commissioner Brady, I will not be, as your elections official, I will not be supporting hand count of ballots except as an audit.
Understood. If you have, I have another question that will that I think you'll have to chew into, but if there's something you want to announce, I can wait.
Dan? I think, is that what you were asking? Is because Dan raised his hand?
I was asking if you had something else on your own agenda that you wanted to present, because I have a major topic to bring up. It can wait.
Oh, okay. So I will, legislation. Let's just talk about the legislative session, as much as it pains me. And I'm on the legislative committee. What always amazes me is how much legislation in regard to elections comes through in a long session and brought by well-meaning people who have no idea of how an election is conducted and the measures we go through to keep it safe and secure and accurate. And so there is a group that brought a bill forward for ranked choice voting. And the idea is that people would move to using ranked choice voting to determine contests. Now, the concept itself has some merit, right? You get to be able to choose your first choice, your second choice, and a third choice, et cetera. And then if your first choice candidate doesn't win, then maybe your second choice candidate moves up, floats up, because it was your second choice, right? So there's a lot of good theory. Supposedly it helps to even out the playing field for minorities, and that it actually is supposedly creates a less hostile election because people are less likely to attack their direct opponent because they think they might need that second or third choice vote to put them up over the top at the end. So those are all good ideas. The bill that is coming out is flawed, as you can imagine. It's written by people that really don't know how to do elections, and the clerk's office for the first time in a long time actually opposed a bill. We normally try to remain neutral and have a seat at the table to be able to kind of work through so that when legislation passes, that there's some way to make it work. This one is getting passed and will go to the voters in the general election next year. And if the voters approve it, it would go into effect January 1 of 2028. Unfortunately, it's extremely complicated. We don't have the software yet that actually will tabulate it. And one of the things about ranked choice voting is that you have to have all of your ballots before you start tabulating. Because generally how it works is you run the first round and you see where the results sit. And if you have one clear winner way above everybody else, right, then that might be it. You might only have to do the one round. But if it's relatively close, what they do is they take the person with the least votes, they drop that candidate from the tabulation, and they reassign any votes that that person might have gotten for their second, third choices, right, that went to the first two candidates that are still in it. And then you run it again and see that now that you've added the second and third choices from the candidate who's no longer viable, now where do things sit, right? And you keep doing that around and around and around until you come out with a clear winner. So that wouldn't be too terribly hard if the contest itself was wholly within Wasco County, right? But there are very few positions, not very few. There's county positions, there's city positions, right? And so you could, I could tabulate that if I had the software, which I don't, and the software is expensive, but I could at least tabulate that once I had all of my ballots and run those rounds and see who the results are. Now you take it up a level, because what is being proposed by this legislation is that this is used for everything from presidential contests all the way down through. Special district could do it, city could choose to do it, whatever, right? Interestingly enough, the only two positions that are not called for using ranked choice voting are the Oregon senators and Oregon House of Representative members, which I find highly odd that the people that are bringing the legislation are the ones that are exempting themselves from having that used to calculate their contests. But the real issue is if you are going to use ranked choice voting on anything larger than a county measure, you now are taking the cast vote records from each county, all 36 counties. And you have to have either the Secretary of State's office is going to do it or a third party. And all of us would have to have the same system so the data would be able to be run. You would have to have somebody else now tallying the results, because you have to have all of the ballots to run the rounds, right? And it's got to be one group that's running the rounds, because otherwise what you've done is you've just had each county use ranked choice voting, but then you're still aggregating. If you don't have somebody that's doing the entire batch of ballots for the entire state, then now you're kind of really not doing ranked choice voting. Because the way it works right now, it's a single plurality vote. Everybody votes for their one person that they want, or two if it's a 2-ballot thing, right? And then that gets aggregated by the state. And the aggregated data is what determines the outcome. If you go to ranked choice voting, then you have to put it all in one big, huge pool, one big bucket before you start tabulating. Because if I was to really take the first, second, and third choices from Harney County and the first, second, and third choices from Wasco County, and we do them separately and aggregate it, that's going to be much different than if we pool those votes and run the results. So ranked choice voting basically got passed last night by the Senate. It will go to the voters, and it's hugely problematic as written. As you can tell, I am not a proponent of it. There's just a whole slew of things, much less the issues that just how poorly the bill is written. So yeah, so that's number one. There are some other minor legislative changes, things like one of the things that passed is that when somebody files their candidate filing form, so that's a public document, right? And here in Wasco County, what we do is we redact the signature so that nobody can, scrape somebody's signature and use it nefariously. But we post that filing up on the site that has got that candidate's information, because oftentimes that's the only information available. Think about the special district election we just had, right? There's not, the news media will sometimes send out questions to candidates, but most people don't know how to find out about candidates, and that's one of the ways to do it. Legislation is just passed that if a candidate wants to redact other parts of their candidate filing form, that we would have to redact, so like residence address. So there's just, things that they make really good common sense. The actual application of them in election management is not quite so simple. Philip.
That was so helpful and educational to get that explanation of the ranked choice voting. Thank you so much. That was of great value to me. And I'm wondering, with that level of complexity, what are your opportunities and abilities to explain this to people? Because, it took you 10 minutes to a very attentive audience to explain it. And it took me a lot of those 10 minutes until finally the coin plonked down in my brain and I go, oh, okay, now I get it.
Right.
So I can imagine that just it's a huge communication challenge. And I wonder what tools are available to you to really inform people about what the ramifications actually are of this. It's so easy to react to without understanding.
Right. No, it's going to be massive PR, right? And it's been difficult because ranked choice voting, and this is what these advocates say, like they tout the benefits of it, right? But they have no clue of how an election works, right? And so the only county that's actually run a ranked choice voting is Benton County. Their commissioners they passed a resolution or an ordinance, one of the two, to have ranked choice voting done. And so Benton County is the only one that has gotten the software. And there was massive money for that effort, mainly just to even educate voters on how it works. Like, how do you correctly mark your ballot, right? Because now it's not so hard if you have maybe 3 people and you give them 3 choices, right? But think about some of like the city contest, City of Portland, I think they had 10 people, right, that were running for a commissioner, right? So imagine what that ballot would look like if you have 10 candidates and 10 choices, and now making sure that people don't forget and mark a different oval for the same choice, for the same contest. It is a massive communication effort just to get people to vote it right. Much less getting people to understand the ramifications of doing it at that larger level and not putting some guardrails around it. And that's part of the problem, is the legislation as it's written doesn't really put guardrails around it.
And are you getting the resources needed for such a massive PR effort?
No, and it just
Kind
passed
of a key
last night.
question.
So I think that the clerks are all this morning, really just kind of reeling for the fact that we honestly had hoped it just wouldn't make it through, especially given how this legislative session has been. But it did, it got passed last night and it will go to the voters. And so the question now, the clock is ticking. And now it will be, how do we educate people between now and next November, November of 2024, right? About that ranked choice voting could be a great idea, but as it's written, it's not ready for prime time. And the counties aren't ready to, even by 2028, right? The money, if it goes in front of the voters, like it's proposed, right? It is now out of the realm of being an unfunded mandate. Right, so the legislation cannot pass something on its own if there isn't the funding for it, right? And I think the fiscal on this bill is $21 million to try and implement it throughout the state. And so without it having been passed by the legislature, now there really is no money. The voters can pass it, doesn't mean that there's going to be any funding for it. And quite honestly, I think we're having to collectively get together and figure out how do we handle this, because if you think $32,000 is a lot for an election, it's going to be way more than that between ballot. Like if you think about the ballots, right? I managed to get all of our contests for any particular election on the front and back of one legal size sheet, right? If you've got ranked choice voting, well, how it lays out on the ballot is differently, right? And you run the risk of now having to have 2 pages in that ballot. And what we have is a 1-to-1 ratio when it comes back to us. So when we're pulling a ballot out of an envelope, if there's no ballot or 2 ballots, that's called a reject, right? Because you can't have 2 ballots. You can't have somebody being able to vote twice, which is in essence what they've done if they've put 2 ballots in one envelope. So we don't count either of them, right? Now, what happens if now we have a multi-page ballot going out and somebody chooses to only vote one of the pages and send it back? How are we going to know if they don't send both back? Like, how do we do that 1-to-1 tracking anymore? Like our whole auditing process and our controls get turned on their head. And we'd have to really do some serious thinking about how we're going to handle that. So what I don't know is just the next steps. Part of me is like, I don't know, can we sue to not have it? But I think it's going to go to the voters. And so, yeah, it gets really sticky from here on out, and it's definitely not ready for prime time. Dan. See, Phil, you should have just taken your chance while you had it.
No, actually, my question was going to be on ranked choice voting. Can it be scaled up from prom court to statewide elections? And the answer is no.
Lisa, I'll follow up on this one because first experience I've ever had in following legislation through was SB 482 on aviation maintenance, which was successful thanks to Senator Bonham, Representative Helfrich. But we had to do I had to do a summary, and it went to Legislative Council on the history of the airport and the issue we had with the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. And then there had to be a fiscal analysis at the state level of potential impact on the state budget. And you touched upon it, but was there any attempt to educate whoever sponsored this thing about the ramifications? And 2, did the fiscal analysis treat only the state impact, or did it go into the individual impact on all of the counties to give the Senate in this case a better understanding of exactly what they were voting on?
So the 21 million was an aggregated number. So each county did their best to kind of estimate what is that going to cost us. And then they aggregated that. And then obviously There's costs at the state, and some of those are hard to quantify, mainly because like this, even the state for a while, it took us saying, you do realize that if ranked choice voting passes, and it is for anything at a state level position or higher, that you guys are going to be the ones to tabulate all of those ballots, and not the physical ballots, but you are now going to become, in effect, like the one that is you're not just aggregating votes anymore. Like you're the one, or your designee is going to have to be the one to do it. And that's when kind of a light bulb went off, like, wait, what? Because they were like, well, we count votes now. No, you don't count votes. We count votes and you aggregate them. Ranked choice voting is different. And so I think the 21 million was an aggregated total. Because like one of the biggest issues is the only people that have that software right now is Benton County, and they use ES&S as their software vendor. Multnomah County is having to get it for Clear Ballot, which is ours, but I believe the cost for them was to get this software was $100,000, I believe. So anyway, that's the hard part, is because once it becomes that this is de facto, part of the other issue is we have 3 different systems that we use in Oregon, 3 different vendors to tabulate votes. And that's fine because we're each doing our own thing. But the minute you need data to talk to each other, to be able to be, tabulated at a higher level, now you're talking about, well, we're going to have to all have some of the same protocols of how that behind the scenes work gets done, so that the data can be tabulated, or we're all on the exact same system. So that's the hard part, that is trying to calculate that fiscal, is because there's just so many unknowns right at this point, that you can say, well, maybe it's going to cost this much, but it's a big lift. And the bigger lift, honestly, is the education part of it. Voters have a hard time now choosing one candidate. And Corliss can attest to this, helping me adjudicate, or being with the person that adjudicates ballots, right? We get a lot of weird stuff that we have to fix in determining voter intent. And that's on a, hey, vote for 1 or vote for 2. So, yeah. Phil, what else?
That was my question, is ranked choice voting, and I would even think in a primary election, you wouldn't be able to give the results back before the general election. It's going to be way too complicated.
Right, at the rate things are going, right, honestly, you could get them back, but we've got that. So we have a week of postmarks after election day, and then we have a 2-week period where people can come in and resolve challenged ballots. So either they forgot to sign, or we couldn't match their signature, and they have 2 weeks after the postmark. So it's basically 3 weeks after election day that people have, that we're just kind of in a waiting period. Like, we tabulate most of what we can and we post all of those interim results, but I can't certify an election anymore until, almost a month out, right? And you would have to wait for that challenge period to end before you could start tabulating the votes under ranked choice voting. So that's where, people think, I used to think elections happened on election day, and that was it, woohoo, right? Not the case. I mean, elections just go on, and you aren't likely to change significantly a vote, but you think about special district elections, and where I had 6 candidates winning by 2 votes each, right? I can't tell you how much I was praying that last batch of ballots that we were going to tally had at least one other write-in of those 6 people. So I could just say, hey, here's who won. And if they didn't qualify, then there's a vacancy, right? But yeah.
One more question. We've talked about moving the county offices into the Gambee building, and we're moving in that direction. I believe I'm correct that would help the election process, correct?
Well, what I would love is for the clerk's office duties and elections to be within the same four walls. Right? Because what happens right now is we do all of the kind of, we're on two different floors. We're on the second floor doing ballot issuing and receiving ballots in, but the tabulation is in the basement, and where we open ballots is in the basement. And this last election, hey, anybody ever heard that we have an elevator that's not working? And the only way to get ballots to the basement was to carry them through the sheriff's office down into the basement. So we had to kind of change some of our processes, and we had to buy some special transport bags so that we could put the boxes of ballots into these bags and lock them. And I had to swear facilities guys in as election workers so that we could, and you have to be CJIS certified to walk through the sheriff's office. So, you know, that's a huge impact. So for my office, what I would love to see is that we're within the same four walls, and that if we're in the Gambee building, that we are on the ground floor, so that I don't ever have to, you know, we will go help a voter at the curb if they've got a disability. You know, we just flat out tell people, you know, you need help, we'll come down to you, right? Or we have a voter assistance team that will go out and help people if they need. But it is increasingly problematic under the current conditions of the courthouse to maintain election security and custody of ballots. And I personally, I would love in 2024 if there was even some of the other departments that were on the second floor of the courthouse that moved into Gambee, that I could take over that space and bring everything up from the basement. I mean, at least I'd be on the same floor, and I'm rolling a locked cage from one door to the next, right? But I don't imagine that my office is going to be in the Gambee building before the 2024 season. I just don't envision that happening, much as I would love it. So, yeah, but all within the same walls.
Okay.
That would be, and on the same floor. Like once a ballot comes into my office, it doesn't leave that office before it's done being opened, tabulated, and good to go. And it's just being stored there. It's problematic having stuff on two floors. We're finally getting some cameras that are motion detected and water detected. Right now, I have to cover my election equipment in the basement with plastic every time I leave, because there, as you know, with most buildings for fire protection, there are sprinklers in the ceiling. And, you know, water and ballots don't really mix very well. And water and election equipment that's very expensive doesn't mix very well. So it looks tacky, but I'm like, hey, it keeps the equipment, right?
Yeah.
That's been, I think, the biggest change in the 8 years. So it'll be 8 years this July that I'll have been county clerk. And those have been some of the massive changes, right? Before, when I first started, there was not this cybersecurity issue that there is now, right? So clerks have had to become cybersecurity experts and plan out for all kinds of scenarios of how things can go wrong. And then add into that now the physical issues. There's a lot more threats and harassment against election workers. So now I'm having to plan out all of the scenarios of how do I keep everybody safe? What's the worst thing that can happen? And how do I mitigate that? There's the misinformation and disinformation. So fortunately, I already had a background in marketing and communications, and I am comfortable creating messaging and talking with people, as you can tell, by the fact that it's 8:01 and we're still talking about this stuff. But it is a vastly different job than when I started 8 years ago. And so, so then you layer in issues like the building stuff, right? There's a reason why I like Freebridge Brewing and visit it on a fairly regular basis.
Yes, the other couple that does Free Bridge.
Yes. Thank you, Lisa and John, to Lisa. and-
Yes.
I
for
think
the
that is
Lisa
one
and
of the
John.
funniest Beer It Forwards I've seen. So
Yeah,
anyway.
for those of you who missed this, it's Lisa and John double. And then we also share the same anniversary, same year.
Okay.
So we forward beers once in a while just because it's fun to see from John and Lisa to John and Lisa. So yes, you know, you gotta have fun. You gotta find those
Yes.
moments and those smiles, and we're supporting local. So
Yes.
yeah. So with that, Lisa, thank you so much. We know that this is not the hot top 10 topics that you would choose to talk about, but it is important. And we love that you took the time to explain so many different aspects we don't ever think about. We do appreciate. I've had you in front of my screen a few times, and yet I'm still glued in. What is happening this time? You make it a fun topic, even though it is one of those, but it is something that's important. And I had no idea about what was being presented to the ballots for this fall. I had no idea that that was going on. So we need to talk a little bit about that later off screen. But with that, it is 8:03. And now I have a ribbon cutting to go do. And so for a new business that's in town. So I am going to duck off, but everyone have a great weekend. Enjoy that weather. It is fantabulous
Right.
out there. And we will have Dan next Thursday, correct? It will be our host. And then I'm still looking for a host for the following Thursday because one of us is finally taking some vacation time and will be off screen. So off the grid as much as possible. So I will make arrangements, but Dan will be your host for next week. And then we will figure out the following week because Dan's going to go off the grid for a while too, before he takes on his new chapter of life. So everyone, thank you. And we'll keep in touch. If you have any questions, give me a call at the chamber.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everybody.